Michael Jordan's the prime example in basketball, where he talks about visual. There's a lot of articles written where he's interviewed and he talks about visualization, and he saw himself making the winning shot, in the final second. So he visualized that a lot on his own, but he learned his own process of visualization. And everybody has different ways of doing that. But I think it's important because, but you also have to visualize the right thing. You can't visualize something that's arbitrary. And so you have to visualize yourself finishing strong in a marathon or whatever the race happens to be. And take the time to do that. But that has to be based on your training and your preparation to make it effective.
Welcome back to another episode of The Painful Purpose, a platform where we discuss the different philosophies of mental discipline and engage with some of the most exceptional minds to unravel the paths and principles taken in their pursuit to mental mastery. Today is a very special episode for more than one reason. First of all, this is the first opportunity that we've had here on The Painful Purpose to be filming below freezing temperatures. It is currently 27 degrees here in Colorado. Secondly, we have a very special guest with us today, someone who is, again, willing to be out here with us in these aggressively cold temperatures. Ric Rojas is a legendary figure in the running community with multiple accolades as an athlete, including being the former 15K world record holder, holding multiple USATF national championships, participating in 2 Olympic trial qualifiers, as well as representing the United States of America on multiple international stages. Ric also is the inaugural winner of the famous 10K road race called the Boulder Boulder, a very popular race here in Colorado and well known amongst the world. Ric also is an incredible scholar who attended Harvard University and ran there collegiately. Now Ric spends his time sharing his wisdom and knowledge as a coach here in Colorado to many athletes of all different types of ages and skill sets and professions, from middle schoolers to professional athletes to master athletes. Ladies and gentlemen, Ric Rojas.
Hey, thanks.
Ric, thank you for being here today,
Thanks,
man.
Dan. Well, I'm lucky to be coaching you.
Absolutely. I was actually about to add, I'm sure I left out a few accolades and achievements that you've obtained throughout your life, but
Gotta lay it on thick, man.
yeah, absolutely. Again, just wanted to thank you for having the opportunity to have you as a coach. I think that's really helped me get to this position, and it's helped me lead to this point where I want to start creating a platform to share the knowledge and the skills and the things that I've learned, that is a byproduct of the lessons that you've taught me. So I really appreciate that.
Well, no, I mean, you've been extremely coachable. You're talented, for one thing, and being coachable, no matter what your talent level is probably the most important component to becoming successful.
No, I appreciate that. And I always look at the things in my life, like the people, like role models who have kind of made those shifts for me. And I looked at when I first moved out here to Colorado, and I joined the triathlon team. And the 2 coaches that I had there, Coach Brad and Coach Dave, who really helped shape the path for me to eventually get into running. And then, meeting you through the networking opportunity. And I just look at it like the benefits of being able to leverage resources. And so when I look at, like when I talk about, the painful purpose and defining moments where you have to overcome those adversities in life, I talk about, if you're in the situation where you're spinning your wheels, leveraging your resources can be one of the most effective ways to actually progress and get out of that situation. And I look at people like you in my life as those resources to be able to get out of those situations. So, in the context, our relationship is really surrounded by running. Over the past 10 months since we first met in January, we first started working together, there's been lots of, meetings and conversations that we've shared that you've helped me overcome those moments where I'm uncertain of how to continue. I wanted to ask, in your life, have you had a role model like that, or when you were younger and you were racing, at the highest level, was there someone that you leaned on to help really gain that wisdom that you hold today?
Well, actually, not really. I was self-coached from the get-go, and basically, I was pretty much way ahead of my time
Okay.
as far as the education was concerned. I did a lot of reading. This was back in the '60s when I first started running, so there wasn't a lot of information available. And particularly with the internet, you can get tons of information. But at the time, I ordered all my material from Track and Field News. And
Wow.
there were a few publications, Fred Wilt, Run, 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 How They Train, but there wasn't a lot available. I read the Jim Ryan story by Rich Clarkson, and Rich Clarkson was actually a photographer. He documented Jim Ryan's career, but he also wrote a biography when Jim was probably only 20 years old, called the Jim Ryan story. But I read that, and that gave me some training ideas, along with some of the other sparse information out there. But really, it was more trial and error. And one of the things about my coaching, I've already made all the mistakes. So one of the philosophies, the bottom line is that I can help people eliminate a lot of those mistakes and not have to go through all that learning process themselves. So if they're coachable, I can save them a lot of energy, a lot of time, and get them better results than as if they were trying to do it on their own.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think that, looking at the full scope of when you were younger to now in terms of resources, from equipment and the science and the shoes that are involved, how much more of an advantage does like a general runner have now than they did back then? Because you talked about you had to make all those mistakes.
Right. Yeah. So basically, we at the time, and I started running back in the '60s. I was a sophomore in high school. There was zero information that I knew about that I had access to. And I went to Harvard and I took one class in exercise physiology. That was it. That's all they had.
Okay.
It was kind of a self-directed study thing. And I wrote an article on high altitude training, for which I got an A.
Okay.
I didn't get that many A's at Harvard, but I got an A on that one. And my career, definitely coaching career, has been self-directed the entire way. But no, there wasn't a lot of information available. There's a lot more. The technology is much better now. I worked for Nike for several years, and actually I worked for Nike for almost a decade.
Okay.
And at the time, Phil Knight and company came out with the Nike Air concept, which was touted as the technological breakthrough that would allow you to run faster. And I remember one time seeing this guy who had bought a pair of brand new air shoes, the visible air shoes, and he was running on the track, and he kept on looking down at his feet and looking at the shoes, thinking that they were supercharged. But really, the air technology wasn't that great. The real breakthrough has been the carbon fiber shoes that have come out here more recently, and those are definitely a breakthrough performance-wise, and can be a lot of the great breakthroughs recently in marathon running can be attributed to those shoes.
It's incredible. We're at an unprecedented time where we just don't know where the limit is. We think it's here and then it gets pushed again. And you saw Kelvin Kiptum just a few weeks ago break the world record going 2 hours, and he's 23. We've talked about, obviously, for the viewers, and that my career in running it's pretty short, but when we discussed this, you say that, you still have a decade, you still have a lot of time.
Yeah. I speak in terms of an improvement window for virtually everybody. And this is one of the elephants in the room that people don't get. They may not think in long-term training, but most people have an improvement window. It could be anywhere between 5 years to, in some cases, as many as 20 years. So in some cases now you see runners in their 30s running PRs. And Bernard Lagat ran his PR at 5,000 meters. He was running 12:55 when he was 37.
Wow.
So his window was about 20 years. In your case, it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 10 years, starting at age 25. But that also is predicated on your ability to pace yourself through your career and not getting too greedy too soon.
Of course.
And one of the big problems I see is high school runners running too many miles, overachieving in high school. And it turns out the research shows that there's a negative correlation between overachieving in high school and achieving later on in life. So they studied, world-class athletes, Olympic gold medalists and so forth, who didn't really have a great early background in running, but started training a little bit later on in their life and ended up running, world-class times.
Okay.
But there's many, many examples of runners who were extremely good in high school and completely fizzled out. So I'm not a big believer in overachievement as an adolescent.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your daughter, Nell, she didn't run too much growing up as well, right? Is that correct?
No, not much at all. My kids didn't run very much at all.
Okay.
They ran cross country, but, just high school cross country.
Okay.
So, maybe they're going to be running 20 miles a week or so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
not much.
So that kind of came in later stages of life.
Yeah, Nell is a late bloomer, and I think that's probably better in a lot of cases because you're more mature, your body's more mature. And if you look at a lot of these kids, I just saw that this, 10 or 12-year-old just ran a world record for 5K. I'm sorry, that's just a bad idea because there's the probability if you're improving over time into her 20s is probably remote, the more she runs right now.
Right.
But Nell didn't start running a marathon. Her first marathon was age 31.
Wow.
And but she had been training for she'd been training for triathlon all this time. So she had essentially been training for a marathon in most of her 20s.
Okay.
A lot of volume, but a lot of swimming and a lot of running and cycling.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk more about your philosophies, in your perspective of coaching. We talked about, I read some of your articles, the 7-tier interval matrix. One of the things as a student of your practices and your coaching that I've seen and I've noticed, especially with all the people that we interact with on a weekly basis, is that people hardly get hurt. And when I say hurt, they get injured, right? And I think that's a really unique perspective because I feel that runners oftentimes, when they don't know what they're doing, they get injured, or if they're being told to do something by someone who really doesn't know the master of running the right way, they end up being in a bad position. So my question to you is, how do you battle that, the transparency and the relationship between your athletes and yourself when it comes to knowing how, when enough is enough, right? So what I'm talking about is, as an endurance athlete, we talked earlier, it's the celebration of suffering, right? That's a really profound aspect of this sport. And given the nature of that, we oftentimes can feel the pain and know when our brain is telling us to stop, but we will keep pushing anyways. So as a coach, how do you battle that obstacle?
Yeah, no, you're right. The whole culture is based on this theme of suffering and penance and hard work and so forth. And what I try to do is I create an environment. A lot of it has to do with language and communication. But if I step back a minute and I look at way back when Steve Prefontaine was running, there were 2 movies that were made on him. One was called Without Limits. And fundamentally, what I believe is that we have to respect our body's limits. And nobody is an Ironman or is able to withstand a lot of training, and particularly in this culture, because we're dealing with running on concrete. That's one of the big things.
Right.
So again, respecting your body's limits is the number one thing. But for example, the name of the movie was Without Limits, the Prefontaine movie. And most people think they can go out and run hard every day, but it's not true. You will get injured sooner or later if you're not respecting your body's limits. So that's what I try to do in my training. And I use body language when I watch people run in person. And so, for example, in your case, the other day you had not slept very much, and we had a 4 times 1,600 meter workout. And I told my assistant coach, I said, you know what? We're going to cut this workout at 3 times 1,600.
Yeah.
Instead of gritting it out, because the last one would have been diminishing returns anyway. So we make a lot of calls in the field. When I see something that might be amiss, what I try to do is make adjustments so that we optimize the workout instead of trying to maximize it. So the whole concept of maximizing versus optimizing is something that I use quite a bit. So the culture says maximize, run as hard as you can until you get injured. Well, that's really not too far off the mark. So what I try to do is I say, okay, at some point in time, we've got the information, we've got the training, we've optimized the workout. We stop. So a lot of times I might stop a workout right smack in the middle of it. So I had a high school kid who was he's a sprinter, very fragile. And our workout might have been 4 by 50 meters. That was the entire workout.
Wow.
And he might do 3 by 50, and we agreed to call the workout. 3 by 50 meters was the entire workout. But he made the Olympic trials and he ran 20:47
Wow.
as a high school senior.
That's incredible.
One of the few high school kids that made it. Well, the whole idea with him was to keep him healthy. And that would be true with any of the athletes that I work with. Try to keep you healthy so you get to the starting line. Because if you get injured and you can't get to the starting line, it's a moot point anyway.
Right.
So,
and I feel like I'm a great representation of the do's and don'ts of the things that you talk about, right? I mean, in this past year, you've really helped educate me and show me the right way to do things. And that led me from January 1st, the first time we met and practiced together. At that point, I don't think I could run, 2 or 3 miles at the marathon pace that I did in August, right? From being able to run 1 mile at a 6:45 pace to be able to run 26 miles at that pace in such a short period of time, right? And I think the great thing that you also shared is, you are here as a resource that I don't have to think about the things that I have to do on a day-to-day basis. And that's one of the struggles I think with runners, and especially at the highest level, there's such a demand for doing a lot consistently. And when it comes to, training 6-7 days a week and maybe doubles and strength conditioning, it's a really tough challenge on the mind over time. Especially I can imagine at the highest level when that's a big portion of your income, it can be stressful. I can only imagine. And I'm sure that, obviously you train athletes across the board, professional and recreational and masters and things like that. So I wondered, I guess my question to you is, do you notice a shift in the types of athletes that you train when it comes to stress levels and like external factors? Like, for professionals, you have to factor in the idea that, this is part of their income. It's almost like a now or never, all in or all out type of mindset versus someone like myself who, I'm ambitious about chasing goals, but if I don't make that goal, I'm still going to be able to eat at night. It's not going to end my livelihood, so to speak. Do you think that's a pretty difficult course to navigate as a coach?
Yeah. I'll back up a minute and I'll talk about physiology, exercise physiology, because the basis of your improvement and how you got good is that you came in with good biomechanics. You came with good oxygen capacity. So we can work with that. So you had a lot of things going for you from the get-go, notwithstanding your triathlon training along the way. So I don't care if you're an amateur athlete, or an emerging elite, or an elite athlete, the same physiological principles apply.
Okay.
So then you talked a little bit about psychology. How do you manage a lot of that psychology? Well, they're both involved, the psychology as well as the physiology. And the idea is to manage both of those at the same time, whether you're an elite athlete like Nell or Molly Grable, or like yourself, an emerging athlete, just trying to improve and break the 3-hour barrier, which you were able to do in your first shot. There are some differences between how you manage a professional athlete. The communication is a little bit different. It's on a different level. Managing an emerging athlete or a beginner is different because you can't overload them with too much information. However, with a professional athlete, you can come in and you can talk at a different level, and it's a more subtle. But the other thing is you have to be careful with the language that you use. I don't care with anybody. You can't just blurt things out. You have to ask the right questions, and you have to be able to listen, and you have to be able to read body language, whether it's just sitting down and having a conversation,
right,
or on the track. So there's lots of things going on when you're coaching and the interaction between you and the athlete. It's
true. I mean, I feel like for you, the actual verbal communication between the athlete is not the priority. You're looking at, their respiration and, like you said, the body language. That's the number one, if that's correct.
No, yeah, no, exactly. The body language and the exercise physiology is, for example, I was coaching a couple of guys the other day. Mayor Tiyudi, who's the Israeli national champion, and we were doing some interval training. And so I could come up close to her. I can hear her. I don't have to look at her watch or anything. I can tell pretty much her respiration rate's too high. So I'll have her jog another lap to recover. And then I have Hunter Gergois, who is a new athlete, just 20 years old, who will come in, and if his respiration rate is high, I'll have him take more rest. Or I might have him slow down on the next interval. So I use a lot of interaction, and I might change things as I go. Just as a quarterback might call, change in the action at the line of scrimmage,
Right.
to try and optimize that situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when it comes to just the conversation of communication, I think that one of the things that I've noticed, like at least in my perspective between you and I, is I consider myself, pretty like quantitative. I love numbers. I love diving into the details, and I feel like you are the same way for the most part, especially after reading some of your dissertations. I see phrases like standard deviation, outliers, things like that. Do you, in your life, especially when you were running at the highest level, when you were in those moments of like pain, when you're running that 5K, when you were running boulder and you're hitting that last, that uphill section going into the final turn into the stadium, how did you break those moments up? How did you persevere through that moment of pain where you had the opportunity to quit, but you kept going?
Yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with having a good race plan and having an approach to whatever the distance happened to be, and knowing that if I had a good plan from a pace point of view, that I could push through that last few meters or last few miles. And I expected to be in a certain amount of discomfort.
Of course.
And knowing that, and knowing that I had to work through that, wouldn't make it any easier, but I could manage it better. So planning is really important for me, and it's always been for whatever race happens to be. And the better I plan, and the other thing is knowing the course and knowing the competition. If I'm going to be competitive, I pretty much know what the other athletes can do. For example, if I'm racing with Frank Shorter, I know that you can't make a mistake against Frank. If you made a mistake, he would beat you. And so, for example, one time we were racing a 10-miler, and I was feeling good, so I went with about 2 miles to go. I made my move at 2 miles to go, and I couldn't shake him. Well, he outkicked me in the last 50 meters.
Wow.
He won by a second or two. So either I'm going to dominate, I'm going to make a move and break it completely wide open, or I'm going to trust my speed and wait for the kick. And in either case, it could be, you have to make a judgment and stick with it.
Right. Of course.
So a lot of it has to do with strategy, more than actually working through the pain, as much as working a strategy and then staying focused as you go through the race.
Right. No, that's true. I think one of my favorite sayings is failing to plan is planning to fail. And I think that really aligns. We talked about our race plan for my first marathon. It was executed almost perfectly. I kind of lost a little bit of steam at the very end, but yeah, it was great. And I totally agree with you. And I think that, the strategy is everything. I think it's increasingly becoming more important, especially in, not just running in life. And at least the way that I look at things, I said earlier, I like to take things and break them up into smaller, activities. Like, one day is, X amount of activities, and you can really quantify everything that you can in your life. Do you think that as an athlete, as a recreational athlete, as a professional athlete, how can somebody improve that thought process of being able to endure more and being able to strategize? And because you said, you have to prepare for that moment where you say, oh shit, it's getting real right now. How do you persevere through that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with your language there, because what it boils down to is breaking it into smaller parts. And I'm a big believer in task orientation.
Okay.
So that, let's say I want you to do an interval session, and let's say it's like the workout you did, 4 times 1,600 meters. What I have you do is focus more on execution of the plan, execution of the workout, than on what it's going to feel like. And if you're focused on the task, a lot of the other stuff goes away. A lot of okay, I'm going to suffer through this thing. No, you're trying to hit a number. So let's say that I said, Daniel, I want you to run the first mile in 6 minutes. You're focused on running 6 minutes. You're not worried about what it's going to feel like.
Right.
And then we go through the progression. I said, the last one I want to run in 5:40. You're still focused on the task. And that takes a lot of the focus on the discomfort away, on the pain you might be feeling. So task orientation is very important. Now, a lot of coaches will say, go all out, push hard. Well, that means different things to different people. But if I quantify it and I say, I want you to run a 5:30 mile, it makes it a lot, I don't want to say easier, but it makes it more attainable and with less pain and strain.
Of course. Yeah. And I've talked about it before too on this podcast, the idea of taking a big task or big goal, like, trying to achieve a marathon and having 9 months to prepare for it, like that's a hard thing to digest, but to break it down into smaller digestible pieces that you can really approach better and kind of tackle on a day-to-day basis, that is the way to do it. And even when we talk about like our coaching and at practice, we break things up. Like for a 1 mile rep, we do quarters, right? Because we're on a track, we're doing 4 laps, and that really helps me think. It's like the first lap, okay, 90 seconds, okay, 2 more, 1 more, and then you're done, right? And I think that's the best approach to life. And I don't know if you've noticed in your life, but for me, I find that transferable into other things, right? Like into my work, into my other hobbies, things like that, where I can take like a big task, like a big project I'm doing at work, say, okay, let me just start this small piece. Let me just get to this little piece, and so on and so forth. And then before you know it, you actually feel better than you thought you were going to be at the end of that point.
No. You should be coaching.
Well, maybe one day.
You should be coaching. Yeah. I think breaking it down to digestible parts is really, really important. And like in my coaching, I'll start with a goal. Let's say you want to run sub 3 hours in 6 months or a year. Then we break that into, I put it all in a spreadsheet, so you see the entire program. And so we plug in the races, and we plug in goals for each race. Then we back up into the workouts and miles per week, splits per workout, type of workouts that are necessary to get there. And so it's all broken down into parts that you can take one piece at a time and really enjoy it. That's one of the things that, Frank Shorter taught me that. When I was training with Frank way back in the 70s and 80s, he would speak in terms of having fun with the workout. And I'm going, wait a minute, this is hard. This is supposed to be hard work. And he says, we finished a 20-mile run, running 5-minute pace or faster. He says, that was fun. And I'm going, taken aback, because I'm going, whoa, I don't know. I guess it was fun, wasn't it?
It's true. And I think it's interesting too. You talk about, training with somebody. I found that, especially towards the end of our build where we do those really, really long runs, it can be increasingly difficult to do those on your own versus having somebody there with you alongside training with, right? Like,
definitely.
I look at, I think the female program that you have with the elite runners, when I've had the few opportunities to run with those girls, I feel like I've improved so much as a runner. And also in that moment, it feels a lot easier compared to, trying to do it by myself out in, by the Boulder Reservoir. It feels like an 8-hour ordeal when it really, versus being with somebody, it goes by in the snap of a finger.
Yeah, there's several aspects to that. One is having a plan for that long run.
Right.
And, we try and adhere to the plan as best we can. The other one is running with somebody else who, helps you pace, and you can pace with them. And the third aspect is having a coach there to give you some feedback and give you some support as well. So I might say a couple of words. I might not say very much, but the fact that I'm there makes a huge difference.
Right.
And, Nell, coaching my daughter Nell, same kind of thing. She'll say, well, I'm glad you were here.
Right.
For a hard workout.
It's true. And I think especially having a coach there will help, kind of like as if it's a bowling lane, like keeping those edges there. Because I feel like, if you're training with a partner and sometimes you might feel that competitive spirit and you might be overreaching, and that can be dangerous, right? So there's such a thin line that you have to ride when it comes to training and being consistent, because the consequence is an injury. Like like I talked about back when I I did the Colfax half marathon, which is a big data point for our training together, and then I did Boulder the week after, and then I did the a half marathon. I'm forgetting the name of the race, but it was the downhill race.
Yeah.
And that was the span of 14 days. And you didn't advise me against it, but you let me learn the consequences of overdoing it and getting greedy, so to speak.
Well, yeah, a lot of times I'll let you go ahead and make your own mistakes. I don't, if it looks like it's going to be a disaster, but you had enough time to recover from that.
Right.
So when talking in terms of quantitative analysis, it's a little like engineering the human body, and you have tolerances, plus or minus, and we try to stay within those tolerances to optimize your exertion levels and the result, the outcome. And you were stepping out a little bit out of those at the time.
Right.
But if I can keep you within those tolerances, it's going to optimize your whole program.
Okay.
Yeah.
I really enjoy the way that you talk about running, because it just comes down to a science, right?
Much more so. But it's a combination. It's a science and an art.
Right. Of course.
And a lot of times, I take the exercise physiology and I take that information and apply it to a training program. But you also have to be able to listen to the athlete and understand what their needs are and where they are in their training program. I will give a lot of credit to Dr. Jack Daniels, who I met when I was in high school back in the 60s, who published, I think, the most important document ever, which is the VDOT chart, which I use every day.
Right.
And that is the genesis of my ratio analysis for running. So then the ratio analysis does work out pretty well for most people. And if you adhere to that approach anyway, it's going to make you a better runner.
That's true. And that's kind of what we abided by throughout our process too, is like acquiring data points all the way from the 400 meters, which is a quarter mile, to the mile, to the 5K, 10K.
That's exactly right.
And so on and so forth.
Yeah, and it makes your life a lot easier if you know what you can do from a pure physiological point of view by taking a look at your data points, 10K, 5K, half marathon, and using that information to plan your marathon race.
Right. Do you see a skew in regards to applying that data across the board of, like, because you train all sorts of athletes. You train, athletes in their later 60s and 70s. You train athletes who are teenagers, right in the middle. Is there a certain, like you said, is there an art form that you have to play into that and to adjust some of those numbers and, kind of understand what's really more realistic versus, sticking to the numbers?
And the art form has to do with individual performance. So if I took you, Daniel Samora, and I said, hey, Daniel, here's your ratios. Here's what you can do. I apply it specifically to you because yours might be different. So when I broke down the ratios from half marathon to marathon for the American runners, including Nell and my people, they were pretty close to an average of 2.1 between the half marathon and the marathon. But Emily Sisson, this ratio was 2.05.
Okay.
Which means that she can sustain that pace, that half marathon pace, much closer to marathon pace over the entire distance of 26 miles.
Okay.
And same with Cara D'Amato. They both had like 2.05, 2.06.
And so for the viewers, when you're saying 2.06 and 2.1, you're talking about the ratio of their half marathon time relative to their marathon
That's
time.
correct. That's correct. And Jack Daniels, if you look at his chart, it's 2.1. And that's a good place to start from. Now, the other thing is when it actually comes to running a marathon, a lot of people still adhere to this old-fashioned theme, old school theme of, getting a cushion by running too fast early on in the race.
Right.
And that's exactly the opposite thing that you want to do. You want to run negative splits if possible, or even splits. So putting money in the bank early, or I should say taking an early withdrawal from your energy resources usually doesn't work very well.
Right.
And it makes it more painful. So if you're a big fan of pain and agony, go out fast in a marathon and pay the price.
Right.
But if you want to run a faster time and have a better experience, go out conservatively and run negative splits.
And that's the beautiful thing about the marathon. I've heard, because obviously running is a huge sport with so many different variations, from distance to style. And I think the marathon is right on that cusp of just long enough where you can really push it, but not too long where you need to be strategic in terms of slowing down. I'm actually, later today, I'm hopping on a flight to Arizona to pace one of my friends at the Javelina 100. So right now he's running 100 miles. When it comes to feats like that, I don't know if you've ever trained any athletes for ultras or long distance like that, but how does that philosophy change when it comes to big feats like that, 24-hour runs and things like that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I have trained ultramarathoners, I trained a woman years ago who was running the Leadville 100.
Okay.
And her husband actually approached me and said, "Hey, would you coach my wife, not my daughter, my wife, for the Leadville?" And I said, "Sure, yeah, she's coachable. I'll coach her." Well, she had the previous year she had gotten to 1 mile to go in the race to 99 miles, and she literally collapsed in a heap and basically couldn't finish. So she went 99 miles out of 100. So I asked her, "Well, here's what I would do. I would teach you how to pace the race." And the problem with a Leadville is that people are encouraged to go out too fast, and less than 50% actually finish the race.
Wow.
Now, if they were smarter, and I'm not trying to demean them, but if they were more conservative in their race plan and went out a little bit slower, then they would finish the race, A. But B, they would finish the race faster.
Right.
So this particular woman, I said, "Here's the paces you need to go out at." And she was dead last at all the checkpoints through the first half of the race. And she was crying. And I said, "Just be patient, stay with it." And she got to the halfway point and she goes, "Wow, I feel pretty good." So over Hope Pass coming back, I paced her over the Hope Pass and she passed 18 people at that point in time.
Wow.
And she just blew by them. I mean, she was running. And then I paced her off the hill, off of Hope Pass down into Twin Lakes. And she was flying. In fact, I couldn't keep up with her. And it was the middle of the night. We had headlamps on and so forth. And I said, what happened to her? So we got down, we forded the river, and she got across, and she was feeling good. And she actually ran negative splits and got finished in I think what the time was like 30 hours.
Okay.
And she was around 28 hours. And at the time, she was in her 50s. But I don't know how many people she passed in the second half of the race, but it was a lot of people.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Afterwards, she said people were commenting to her. They said, "How'd you do that? Boy, you just blew by me like I was standing still." But it was all pacing. And, she was very fit and she was prepared, but she was coachable and willing to do what it took to run a fast race.
Right. And ultimately, it really comes down to having that discipline, right?
It comes down to the discipline part of it, yeah.
An ultra marathon is a little bit different, but in a shorter race, like a 5K, it's way more tempting to just go out quick. It's going to be a 15, 20-minute race. It's over before you know it. So it's really difficult to be able to tell yourself you have to stick to the plan.
Well, I don't care if it's a 5K or a mile or 400 meters, marathon, ultra marathon, you have to have a plan. And to the extent that you can practice, pacing yourself. And we do a lot of that in our training. So, for example, if we do a bookend workout where we do like a mile or 2,000 meters to start off with, I say just run marathon pace. So you're actually physiologically and psychologically programming your body to run at a particular pace.
Okay.
And that will carry over and translate into the race itself.
Have you ever experienced adversity as a coach from like an athlete who really struggled with that, with sticking to a plan and not overdoing it and always pushing themselves past that limit?
Well, initially, most people will come in with a sort of a pre-programmed agenda,
okay,
whether they know it or not. And so I have ways to train people and to coach them so that I actually coach that out of their system. And so by the time I've coached them and I've taught them the concepts and the language and the actual physiological programming, not too many problems. Yeah.
That's good. I mean, that's amazing. I think, like I said at the beginning of this episode, it's a true testimony when we're at practice weekly and we see everyone almost all the time, because not everyone's getting hurt. I feel like that's not the case, especially at, being in such a mecca like Boulder, Colorado. There's so many groups, so many running groups, so much ego around, and I feel like it's oftentimes, that can lead to a disaster, like an injury and things like that.
Yeah. I have had athletes where they still believe that running as hard as they can is going to get them where they want to go, but really has more to do with actually doing the program, executing the program, my program, than it does with running hard, because only a small amount of it is actually running hard, a certain percentage, whether it's a long run or interval training. Probably 80% is more tedious.
Of course.
Just getting through the workouts than it is hard.
Definitely. And conditioning. That's
conditioning, exactly.
That's a huge piece of it.
That's where you have to be patient, because that does take a while for the training to kick in over the course of years.
And it's interesting because I'm sure that and most runners and athletes would agree that when it comes to that race day, like at practice, we would practice a certain pace, and that's always more difficult than when you're actually racing. That sub 6 minute pace in practice, I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. And then you go out there and race, and it feels so much easier. And I think that might attribute to mentality, and also before my first marathon, we talked about visualization and getting into that mindset. How much of a factor do you think that plays into overall performance, especially at the highest level?
Very much so. If you talk to, Michael Jordan's the prime example in basketball, where he talks about visual. There's a lot of articles written where he's interviewed, and he talks about visualization. And he saw himself making the winning shot,
right?
In the final second. So he visualized that a lot on his own, but he learned his own process of visualization. And everybody has different ways of doing that. But I think it's important because, but you also have to visualize the right thing. You can't visualize something that's arbitrary.
Right.
And so you have to visualize yourself finishing strong in a marathon or whatever the race happens to be. And take the time to do that. But that has to be based on your training and your preparation to make it effective.
Okay, I see. Do you think that since when did you start Rise?
I've been coaching, it was Ric Rojas running before we changed the name to Rise a few years ago.
Okay.
So Ric Rojas, I've been coaching, I started coaching in high school.
Okay.
I coached my high school team.
Oh my gosh.
Cross country and track. Because by the time I was a junior in high school, I knew more about training than the coaches did. Because at the time, endurance running wasn't really as it is today, where there's a lot of information and a lot of coaches out there have had experience and so forth. So basically, I self-taught myself and started coaching back then, and I've been coaching off and on ever since then. Here in Boulder, since the 90s, early 90s.
How do you think that has changed you as a person? Since, being able to impact so many people from so many different backgrounds, how has that impacted, your life?
Well, I look at it as I'm making a contribution to the community, the running community, as best I can. And I try to make myself available to different levels of runners, high school runners, masters runners, and elite runners, and try to share the information that I have. So, it's gratifying to be able to have success. For example, Molly Grable has had breakthroughs across the board in her marathon and 5K, 10K, 1,500 meters, just all the different distances.
Right.
And other runners have done well too. But it's always gratifying to see them succeed based on hopefully what I've taught them to do. And high school runners too. I mean, I've had all kinds of success with high school runners. And part of the philosophy there is that you don't have to do that much to become a good high school runner. I think a lot of the coaches will overtrain their kids, run too many miles, and where I believe then just run enough miles to get better and then save the rest for later on, college and beyond.
Of course. Yeah, that's something that I found interesting, because when I went to grad school out here in CU, I had a few classmates who ran track and field here, and they're incredible runners, 28-minute 10Kers, and just very fast. And I asked them, okay, well, have you ran a marathon? They're like, no, never. Like, not yet. And that's when I learned it's something that comes later in life, especially like from the career as a track and field athlete. And I think that's very interesting. Do you think as a coach, just having such a wide range of athletes, have you been able to pick and pull certain lessons from one area of athletes and being able to apply to the others? So, like, for example, from masters athletes to professional, from professional to middle schooler and so on, or junior and so on?
Yeah. The same physiological principles apply whether you're just beginning or later on, but that you have to fine-tune those to the different age groups. For example, with high school kids, I believe that you only need to run 3, maybe 4 days a week to improve and get better. And it's easier on your body.
Okay.
And I mentioned before that I think that a lot of high school kids are overtrained, running too many miles. I have this indoor program they do every year, and the kids come in 3 days a week, And sometimes I'll ask them, well, what are you doing the other days? And they'll say, nothing. I say, good. But they all improve. They all, to a person, they get PRs because they're not overtraining themselves and they're optimizing their energy to get good times. So, but for an elite athlete, we're talking about like Nell, for example, or Molly, they're going to be running 7 days a week, and they're going to be running a lot more because they're more mature. They're around 30 plus or minus a couple of years or older, and their bodies are more mature and they can handle a lot more training. So you have to fine tune and apply the exercise physiology to different groups of people. And with my master's athletes, I got a few who are pretty good, but they're gonna run 3 days a week. That's it. And then the other days they might do some cross training, some therapy, stretching, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I won't mention any names, but there are definitely a few of your athletes that push the master athletes that like to push the limits and end up getting hurt, and that's never a good thing.
Yeah, sometimes, but I try to mitigate it as much as I can.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If I were to ask you at the position you are in your life, looking forward, what your purpose is, what would you say that is?
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much consistent with my philosophy, is trying to teach people that the human body has limitations, and it's not unlimited, and that if you work within those limitations and respect your body's limitations, that you become a better runner. And carrying that message forward is probably the thing that I would continue to do going forward, and try to make myself available to impart as much information and wisdom as I possibly can for young runners or runners at any age, for that matter.
It's interesting because it's so true, right? Like, our bodies do have limitations, but there's a certain correlation between what you're saying and then understanding how to really reach right below that threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And the distance between that and when your mind begins to say, hey, I can't do this anymore. So it's such a fine line of being able to push further but not too far, to the point where you're reaching past that limit, and then you end up getting injured or something like that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting concept, because if you go to my website, I have 10 principles, one of which is progression and the other is patience. And the progression has to do with exercise physiology. And let's say you're putting X number of units of energy out there over time. You never really have to change that. Basically, what you do is you change the nature of the workouts themselves so that a progression is created. And if you push beyond that too hard, then it'll backfire on you. So you have to let it. It's an organic sort of progression that you create to allow the athlete to get better.
Okay.
And if you do it right, the athlete will say something like, "Wow, that was easier than I thought."
Right.
But that's based on a long progression, and the athlete being patient about the time frame that's occurring under.
That's true. And there's also so many other factors too, like on a more relative basis, like how much sleep you're getting, how well hydrated you are, if you have enough fuel in your body, your glycogen levels. There's so many different things that play into that specific workout. But no, it's true. I think as an athlete, when you do have those breakthrough workouts or you have those breakthrough races, it's the best feeling in the world. And unfortunately, that happens about 2% of the time. And then the other 90% or 98%, you're working through the grind, and again, having to be patient, having to really push through that feeling of uncertainty at times.
Yeah, and the whole idea is creating peak performance. So in your case, running that marathon, I don't know how you rank that for yourself, but running a strong sub 3 hour first marathon, now you're almost in a sub elite category, because if you go back and look at the statistics, very, very few people, probably less than 1% of everybody out there, is going to be running under 3 hours. Now, let's say you started shooting for sub, say 245, then it's a whole different conversation.
Right.
Your physiology changes, your lifestyle changes a little bit, how you approach your running changes a little bit, but yeah, it does change how you look at yourself.
Of course. Yeah, no, I agree. We'll get there.
Yeah, it takes time.
I think we talked about the whole idea of running sub 3 was to qualify for the Boston Marathon, which obviously, as it's a very well-known race, and probably one of the oldest marathon in the world, and just an incredible race to be able to have the opportunity to participate in. And not making it hurt, right? But it almost gives me more fuel to be able to come back next year and do even better.
No, I like that approach because, come on, you're only 25.
Yeah,
So,
it's true.
Your improvement window is probably around 10 years. So if you're patient, I'd much rather see you improve gradually, step by step, and experience that Boston Marathon over time. Give it some time than right away, because it'll make you a better runner ultimately, and you'll have better times over the next 10 years or so.
That's true. I also think of it as something, I have this idea, it's like what is earned versus what is given, right? And that's the thing I love about running and about just sports in general, is that no one can give you that ability. You have to work for it, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter where you're from, your background, you have to put in the time. And I think there's a mutual respect that's also contributed to that. When you see someone else running and you see someone else achieve something so incredible, you can really respect that because you know that that's earned. And I think that I just haven't earned that right yet. I hit the qualifying standard, but it's just not yet. It's not the right time.
Yeah. And this is very typical because what in this culture, immediate gratification is really, dominant. And if you can learn delayed gratification, patience, and progression over time, you'll thank yourself, over the years for giving yourself the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Absolutely.
But yeah, you're pulled to, and at age 25, and anybody is pulled to, hey, I want my Oompa Loompa, and I want it now, kind of thing, So
that's awesome.
You want to give yourself some time to develop.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Rick, thank you so much for
Sure.
taking the time. If people want to reach you, obviously we're going to link your socials and your website in our description, but any preference as to how you'd like people to reach you if they wanted to?
Yeah, they can go to my website, ricrojasrunning.com, and there should be some links on there to reach me or sign up for my programs. But, and then I think some other contact information's on there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As well as some of your dissertations and your...
Yeah, some of the articles I've written.
Yeah, they're awesome. I have a little gift for you.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you noticed these Rubik's Cubes.
Yeah.
This is a little token for, being a guest on The Painful Purpose. Wow. Little background of the Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
Something that I came across a few months ago. I think it's a great symbol for perseverance. If you push yourself through the feeling of discomfort, right? When you're learning something new, when you're in that moment in the race where you can give up, that opportunity, that feeling gives you that reason to quit, right? But if you just continue to push through that feeling, you will succeed and eventually solve that puzzle, right? And so that's the whole theme of The Painful Purpose and the Rubik's Cube and why it's kind of our logo behind everything. Because if you just sit down and you're able to deal with that pain, that frustration of, I don't know how to solve this thing, but I'm going to keep going to the point where I can, then you'll eventually become successful. So yeah, just a little token.
No, thank you.
Rick.
Yeah. And your whole idea of being the theme that you began on, which is identifying resources,
right,
and maybe getting a coach to help you with this.
Right. Absolutely. I would be happy to help guide you along that way.
Okay, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thanks,
and you're a very smart person. So quantitatively, that's a very obtainable goal.
I'll start working on it right away.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, thank you so much again for watching. If you're watching on YouTube and you guys would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel to never miss an episode and support us, you can hit that subscribe button. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, taking a moment to leave us a rating would be wonderful. It really helps support us and helps grow this audience. Again, as I said, we are filming these videos on YouTube. If you are listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and would actually prefer to watch us suffer here in the cold, that's also a great way to do it. I don't know about you, Rick, but I'm freezing my ass off. So
no, not too bad. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. My toes are cold now. But
I was progressively starting to get more cold. Yeah. But Ric Rojas, thank you so much, man.
Fun.
Seriously.
Yeah, totally unique up here in the middle of nowhere.
Absolutely.
On top of the mountain, right? Next time we got to do it on top of one of those mountains up there.
Yeah, we thought about that at some point. One final note, just want to also share a shout out to our producer, Davis. None of this would be possible without him. A lot of hard work gone behind the scenes. We're, very grateful for Davis, and just it takes a team to really make the dream work. So, Davis, thank you, and for all your hard work, man. Appreciate you.
Nice, Davis.
He's freezing his ass off behind the cameras right now. Awesome. All right, guys. We'll see you next time. Thank you.